Oh my days, right. I can't believe it. I can't believe that I've been speaking about this fucking person for days and days and days. Nobody's mentioned his name. But all of a sudden, that, it's not on this bit, it's what I've just watched, it's nothing to do with this part, sorry. All of a sudden, a Royal Air Navy helicopter has crashed. And King Charles can all of a sudden, he's going to give a speech for the families and things because, you know, the people have lost their lives. God knows how or why. Maybe it is generally an accident. Maybe it's just generally a fault of the helicopter or something. Just a genuine accident. This might be one of them where it was just a genuine mistake. So the cunt's still alive to say, give these condolences in a minute.
From the wreckage, it's clear how catastrophic this was. Only the tail of the helicopter intact after it crashed overnight during a training exercise and set on fire. A major incident was declared at 4:45 this morning.
Don't get me wrong, I think King
Members
Charles
of the
should give
Royal
them a
Navy
speech,
on
yeah.
board died. Witnesses say they heard the helicopter flying low.
But what
before
about
impact.
Henry? Why has he not come and said a prayer and speech for Henry, eh? Where's King Charles on that one?
So
Oh yeah, because he belongs to the Royal Navy Force,
worked
because he
out
belongs to King Charles, don't he?
hit the ground.
But Henry didn't belong to them,
and that
so
was
Henry
about
doesn't
it.
get a speech
And
from the
about-
King.
About 5 to 6 minutes after that, there
Because
was a big
Henry's not
bang.
important to
An
King
explosion,
Charles, is he?
right.
It was a Merlin Mk4 helicopter, usually used for moving troops and equipment
Yeah, I'm
onto
not saying they
ships.
should die,
Royal
fair
Navy
enough, no
says
one
it
should
can
die.
carry up to 24 personnel.
It might just be one of
The
them
Prime
accidents,
Minister
it could just be a
today
genuine
acknowledged
accident.
the need for answers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm also aware.
No, you want the need
of
for
a Royal
answers
Navy
here, but
helicopter
don't want the
crash
need for answers
this
for Henry
morning
Novak,
in
do
Dover.
ya?
This will be a deeply worrying
From your
time for
police
the families,
officers, no, do
and
ya?
more information will be set out as soon as possible.
There was disruption on
And
the
there's a
roads
lot more of them
as
going in
7
the
fire engines
in
worked
the
to put
court
out the
thing as
blaze
well,
at the
isn't
crash
there?
site, and teams started investigating the scene.
Well, we're almost directly between two Royal Navy air bases here, Caldrove in Cornwall and RNAS
Belong to the
Yeovilton
King.
in Somerset, which is one of the busiest military airfields in the country. Now, helicopters are often seen flying around here because we're also close to Oakhampton Battle Camp. It's not yet known, though, whether this was a routine training exercise or what they were training for.
Well,
These helicopters are designed for complex
don't
missions
get me
flown
wrong,
by
I'm not saying
highly
anybody should
trained
die,
pilots.
God bless so
Devon
many
and
of
Cornwall
them.
Police say they are working with the Ministry of Defence to try to understand how such a modern aircraft got into difficulty.
Emergency services working together with the Royal Navy and the Civil Aviation Authority have mounted a significant response, and that accident is still under investigation.
Tonight, the emergency response has been scaled back.
Scaled
The
back.
investigation into what happened here and how 3 members of the Royal Navy lost their lives will no doubt be long and difficult.
Well, we're about half a mile from the crash site. It's believed the helicopter had flown from RNAS Yeovilton in Somerset, circled several times here before disappearing off the flight tracker at about 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, this part of Dartmoor is used regularly for military training because of the rolling hills and valleys. This landscape means troops can practice complex military missions, not only the Royal Navy, but it's also used by the Royal Air Force too. There is a strong military connection here, but also a strong connection to the royal family. Today,
Here we
King
are.
Charles, who undertook his helicopter training at RNAS Yeovilton, says he will
Did ya?
privately message the families involved, and the Princess of Wales has shared how saddened she is.
Is
Speaking
she?
about the 3 service personnel, she said,
Oh,
"We
they're all
will
so
hold
sad for
their
them, but they're
families
not
and
so
friends
sad
in
for
our
fucking
hearts
Henry,
at
though,
this
are they?
difficult
None of
time."
them. So, I'm right all along. King Charles.
Hundreds, possibly thousands actually, have gathered in Southampton
No,
this
King
evening
Charles.
after Bolly.
It's got plenty of time to speak about the people that have died now in the Royal Air in that helicopter crash, which, I mean, I'm not disputing anybody should die in anyway. But here we are, this is where we got sold out from. Why the Jewish financial, Norman English. No, 1,066 years ago. 1,066 years ago, basically, yeah? That's where we got sold down the river to Jews back then. And it's just carried on. And carried on. And carried on. Nobody still speaks about King fucking Charles. Hey. Apart from ITV
From
News,
the wreckage, it's
they mention King Charles because
And the
it's-
responsible thing to do now for the country and for the people of this country is for Advance UK to take a step back.
Are you going to join Restore Britain?
I haven't made a decision. I'm certainly not ruling out doing something with Restore in due course.
Are you going to defect to Restore Britain? Are you involved in the party?
Come on, Bellaby.
I have joined.
Are you tempted at all, Kelly?
Am I tempted?
Yes.
Breaking right now,
'Cause she was for
Advance
Advance once, yeah?
UK folds as a political party as Ben Habib
That's where she was
backs
from, Advance.
Restore Britain and Rupert Lowe
Good.
with an attempt
Thank
to
you.
unite the real right of British politics.
Good.
Now, I think this is a very patriotic decision from a
I
very
do.
patriotic man. It has garnered a massive response across the political right today, with people
Well, I hope
saying,
so, yeah.
actually, there is now hope that there can be an alternative force to Nigel Farage and Reform UK.
Because I'm not
Ben
racist.
Habib will
I
join
don't
us
wanna be
for an
like that.
exclusive interview in just one moment. But first, I want to show you his announcement earlier today.
And the responsible thing to do now for the country and for the people of this country is for Advance UK to take a step back and to
Let's
allow
not take a step back. It's to
the
join with
pressure that
Restore Britain.
will undoubtedly
I'm going
bring
to say,
on
look, let's not
reform
take a step back.
and
It's to
the
join with
Conservative
this
Party
party, yeah.
to take to
Join.
allow that to develop.
We need you, Ben
and
Habib.
either
Ben
form
Habib,
something new,
Restore Britain
create
need you.
a genuine, serious, principled,
people
pro-British
need
force
you.
that eventually becomes government, or becomes government in its own right.
Okay.
Restore Britain leader Rupert
Like I
Lowe
say, well, you go and do it
immediately
then.
welcomed that announcement, posting on X. Ben Habib
Well,
has just announced that Advance UK
that's
is
not
taking
as
a
easy
step
as
back
saying
in order
things
to
like
allow
that,
the
is it?
momentum
Let's
behind
just be
Restore
silly.
Britain to build. Ben has previously endorsed Restore Britain in Makerfield, and I thank him for that.
Yeah,
I
and you
believe
need
that
Ben
Ben and the
Habib. Ben
wider
Habib
Advance
is
UK membership
needed.
who are patriots who want the best for
Ben
Britain,
Habib, you
they
need
are
it.
welcome in our Restore Britain family to help
You
deliver
really
the
are.
radical change that the country so desperately needs.
I'm going to say you
Ben
really
and
need
I
it
have
in
not
this battle,
always
Ben
agreed
Habib.
on
We're all need
logistics
it.
over the last few
Even I
months.
need it. All of us
That's
need it.
politics. But this is
We're also
an
doing this.
incredibly
We're all-
principled decision, and I have the utmost respect for what Ben has sacrificed to build Advance to where it is today. For both Ben and I, it is country first every single time. It would be an honour to welcome Ben and the Advance UK membership into Restore
Yes,
Britain,
please.
but that is a decision for them, and I will respect whatever they decide. In the years to come, today will be seen as a significant event
Today,
on Britain's path to
I hope he
restoration.
says yes, please.
And Ben Habib
There's
joins
no
me
reason
now
not to.
alongside
Come on,
our
there's no need for
superstar
that.
panel.
There's
UKIP
no need
leader
to be
Nick
bickering.
Ten Coney,
You know, da, da,
Henry
da, da,
Bolton,
because
a former
I'm
UKIP
gonna
leader,
tell us
and
anyway, isn't
activist Kelly J. Keane.
I'm going to say.
So Ben Habib, this must have been a really difficult decision. I know the passion that so many of you have put into
I was
Advance
going to say we all
UK,
probably need to put
but
our
it
own
is
differences
certainly
aside.
a
and just think
patriotic
what I'm saying.
decision that proves when you have
Just
said
think
you
about
will
Henry.
never put ego first, you will always put country first, you were not fibbing. The first question I have to ask though, Ben, because it's
Henry
what
first,
everyone
and
wants
like
to
you said,
know
Henry's
after
trying to
Rupert
put anybody
Lowe's
else first.
response to you
He's
on
up
X
there. He
is,
shouldn't have died
are
the way he
you
did, but he can
going
see
to
what's
join
happening.
Restore Britain?
Well, he's still, his
I
spirit's
know,
still here. He can
because
still
I've
see.
been told by senior sources within
Just
Restore
people
Britain
die,
that at some point
the
they
body
even wanted you to
doesn't mean the
become
spirit does.
deputy leader under Rupert Lowe. Have you made a decision about that? Would you consider joining the party?
And he's saying that could be anybody's
I
children.
haven't made a
And that's
decision.
all of us.
The idea of being deputy leader, I think, comes from when Rupert and I was talking about merging the parties. The idea was
I
that he would
mean,
be leader and I would be
it
deputy. I think that's
is
a hard
Muslim
back
people
to
and
discussions we
Pakistani
had
people
earlier
and
this
pain
year.
blunts as well
But,
as us.
for me, you
Just
said it was a
because we
difficult
don't
decision.
feel like
Actually,
they
funny
are,
enough, it wasn't
and
particularly
we're not
difficult,
seeing that
Dan,
side of
because
it,
you might
because
recall
they're just
I only
gaslighting
launched
us again.
Advance because I felt Advance was
Yeah.
needed, because I didn't want a political movement on the
Right.
right-hand side of reform. I wanted a party which could, you know, give reform a run for its money and at the very least try and convert reform into a proper political force, and at the very best replace it, because as you know, I don't have much faith in the leadership of reform, and I don't think they have a political philosophy, and I think they'd be not very good for the country. So that's why Advance was
Because it's
launched.
going to go to
And
what Tony
when
Blair
Rupert
will be doing,
Lowe
King
was
Charles will be
launched
doing.
Restore, and that was slightly disappointing for me, because I thought Rupert and I would be able to work together, but be that as it may, Restore was launched and Advance existed. And this created basically a far too splintered right. We've already
now
got
it's
a number of parties on the so-called right of
talking about
politics.
anything. How come
And
we took that
Restore is not only
how
doing
come-
well on social media, but it did extremely well in a real 10 local elections in the Great Yarmouth area. And it seems to be polling very well in Makerfield. Now,
How can it
I
be
do
the
have my
people,
differences with
the
Restore.
poor
It's a
people
party
like
owned by
me
Rupert
that have
Lowe,
got
and
nothing, I
there are
can't
some elements in it with which I disagree, but
create
he
that.
is undoubtedly, Restore is undoubtedly
The only people that
more
create
of
that are
my
people like that.
disposition than it is of Farage's disposition.
Mm.
And
We've
he
been
is
bought out.
undoubtedly going to bring massive pressure on
Right,
reform
Saudi
and
Arabia,
also the Conservative
and
Party.
Israel,
And
and
it would be wrong
Russia.
if
Once
I
again.
am of the mind, as I say I am, and which I am, of simply doing what's right for the country. It would be wrong to
Maybe it
just
wasn't
continue
was
to
no
occupy
notice.
that space,
I think it was Saudi Arabia.
pretending to be an
I
electoral
think it's Saudi
force,
Arabia
when
that bought him
actually
out.
the real combatants at the moment are Reform and Restore, and causing confusion. Let them get on with it. What I effectively said today is we're going to preserve the integrity of our membership, our structure, our ability to produce policy and so on, by merging with the Great British Political Action Committee, which is a political action committee, not a movement, as distinct from a movement. We'll go on doing our thing. We'll preserve our existence, as it were, through the GB PAC. And we'll watch Restore, and we will hope and pray that Restore does everything that we hope of it. And but if they don't, and if Reform collapses or there's some other need for Advance to come back into the fray, then we'll come back into the fray. But I'm certainly not ruling out doing something with Restore in due course either. All options are on the table now, aren't they, Dan? Because I'm basically removed myself from electoral politics. And what I would like to see, actually, if there's anything good that comes with it, people talk about uniting the right. What I've done is vacate the field so that the right can unite. And or there can be a debate and then the right can come together in some shape or form. What I would like to see is some grown-up thinking from the leadership of Reform and some grown-up thinking from the leadership of the Conservative Party, both parties of which seem to be more party before country. And I think it's time that they did some introspection and looked at how important the 2029 general election is and set aside their desire for office, which seems to supersede their desire to do the right thing, their desire to be in office on their own, set that aside and understand what it is the country needs, and then come together as grown-ups. I know I hate the expression grown-ups, but I'm going to use it in this case. Come together as grown-ups and do what the country needs. Get a pro-British centre-right government that will deliver this country to redemption, restore this country.
Nick Tinconi's with us today too on the Superstar panel. He is the leader of UKIP, so you're obviously part of this Unite the Right discussion as well, Nick. But at the Gorton and Denton by-election, you upset a lot of people by backing Reform UK. Have you made a decision about what you're going to do in Makerfield? And does Ben Habib's decision in terms of Advance UK feed into what you might do with UKIP, or what you might do with Restore Britain?
The decision to put out statements on Gorton and Denton, and I believe Makerfield, we're not in the business of, we're not here to be liked. That's the price you pay for leadership. Everyone in leadership knows that. I stand by everything that I've said.
Well, he's bought somebody then.
I completely
Have you been
acknowledge
bought?
and understood and named, it's very important, named the war. This is traditionalism versus communism. This is the political ideology of conservatism versus economic socialism. We are at war both culturally and economically. Let's not forget we're being taxed into oblivion. It's called economic socialism for a reason, and we all know that it's called cultural vandalism, which has its roots in all sorts of hideous, evil, and insidious ideologies and agendas. And in the case of Henry Novak, God rest his soul, it's cost him arguably his life will never know what could have happened in those 3 minutes. So make no apologies for where we are, what we've done since summer 24. I've had every single hurdle that could possibly be thrown at me as a leader of a mainstream political party, and we are still up. We are still up because I can walk into a crowd of 50 people or 1,000 people, and they all want to speak to me. They all want to hear me speak. They all want to hear me, most importantly, Dan, diagnose the problem. This is traditionalism versus communism. It is the right, but the conservative right versus the hard left. This is the long march through the institutions in terms of the wickedness. So, as long as Nigel Farage is moving to the right, as long as Nigel Farage is saying radical stuff, as long as him and Zia are playing ball, I know for a fact that him and his team are observing what we do at street level, the fuss we make, the noise we make, the direction of travel we set, the rhetoric that we use. They can see all of those things. Now, as long as they're contesting, in the case of the locals, 99% of seats, as long as they're on the trajectory to do what they're doing, as long as they poll where they poll, and as long as Nigel has the infamy that he has, as long as those things are true, my thoughts and feelings about Nigel and reform aren't relevant. Facts are relevant, and that is that we must, myself, Ben, Rupert, people that I admire, respect, and love.
And blaming Russian oligarchs, this, that, and the other.
That's the fact. But we must pool in some way, shape, or form money, resource, candidates, systems, processes. We must campaign.
Who bought you then?
Ideas. We must
bought you?
That if our ideology and if our campaigns align. If they don't, then there's no point.
Who bought you?
If they do, we must do that. In case.
Because Bella Beef's not been bought. It's not saying what you're saying. Bella Beef's not been bought.
Here in Bolton, I've been fascinated to ask you about this.
See now. I can start to see who's being bought. People are being bought.
You have taken on a senior role within the SDP party. But you were actually spotted, I believe, at a big Restore Britain event over the weekend. What's going on? Are you going to defect to Restore Britain? Are you involved in the party? But first, before we get back to the show, a quick word about something I use genuinely every day: Surfshark. Most people browse the internet, shop online, check emails, or jump onto public Wi-Fi without thinking twice. It feels routine, right? But what you don't always see is what's happening in the background. Every click, search, and website visit leaves.
I'm going to say I see what's happening in the background without any of that.
Hackers can take advantage of unsecured networks, and your personal information can end up far more exposed than you realise. That's why I use Surfshark. It helps make my online activity much harder to track by encrypting my connection, hiding my IP address, and adding a layer of privacy whenever I'm browsing. Whether I'm working from home, travelling, or using Wi-Fi in a hotel or an airport, I'd rather know my data is protected than just hope for the best. And Surfshark is more than just a VPN. It protects your connection, your devices, and your personal information in one place. Its ad blocker helps cut out intrusive ads, trackers, malware, and phishing links, so your browsing feels cleaner and safer. That matters whether you're reading the news, shopping online, or just trying to avoid the endless creep of being monitored across the internet. What I also like is that it's simple to use. One account covers unlimited devices, so you're not just protecting one laptop or phone, you can secure the whole household. So if you want an easy way to protect all aspects of your online life, go to surfshark.com/outspoken or use the code outspoken at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN plus a 30-day money-back guarantee. That's surfshark.com/outspoken using the code outspoken for 4 extra months. But now, back to the show.
I have joined Restore UK, Restore Britain, sorry, apologies. And I've provided a bit of advice on a few things. I'm not in a position to, and nor would I, even if I was, give you any insight on what Rupert's thinking in regard to what you've just been discussing with Ben and Nick. I do think that we are in a sort of existential battle for the cultural identity and future of the United Kingdom and the British people, and indeed the English, Welsh and Scottish people as well. I think, as I said earlier, we have been under a sustained assault as the British. We have been expected, and indeed we have been pushed aside culturally by imported cultures. That's not always their fault. It's often the fault of people like Keir Starmer, who have been building that narrative for many years and pushing it now legally from the position of government, and with that influence through policing, as we were discussing earlier. So there is Nick's right. There's an absolute need for us to be pushing back. I'm not sure whether there is really scope, personally speaking, for some of the coming together that people would like. Nigel Farage, Zia Youssef, and so on often people say to me, Henry, why don't the right do more to unite? As though it is the fault of other people. Yeah. No, the primary responsibility for that failure to unite rests with the leadership of Reform UK.
Okay. Totally, that's always what I'm saying, exactly. The other ones that describe Tommy Robinson's supporters as that lot. And I spoke to someone very senior connected to Reform UK the other day who said
so they want half a collapsation because they don't want you to reunite to be your friends.
To this day,
because then they're in trouble. If they reunite completely, then they're in trouble.
You're looking at all of this, and I just wonder if you believe that the direction of travel now, because I think it's fair to say you've been quite open to Reform UK, but I wonder if you think the direction of travel is heading towards Restore Britain when you think about the Ben Habib announcement today, when you think about Henry Bolton now defecting to Restore Britain, and
we're in trouble, and if we unite, they're in trouble. So that's why we don't want that either.
Possibly, not really. I just want some egos just put themselves aside just for a bit so that we can...
Like Ben's done today.
Pardon?
Like Ben's done today.
Well, yeah, of course. And, Ben's a decent bloke, so he's going to do stuff like that. I'm not necessarily talking about Ben's ego. The other two, the two big egos, I feel like Makerfield is really important. Andy Burnham is really important. Andy Burnham gives the new lease of life to Labour. They'll become much more electable because they have a brand new leader that can say, hey, that wasn't me, this is all new. And I do think he might bring some people back to Labour. So Makerfield is really important.
No, I don't.
If a party doesn't get, like, let's say that the election's tomorrow and Restore gets, say, 15% of the vote and Reform lose by 2%, then I do think people will look at Restore and think, well, why did you do that? Because I think Reform can take votes from Conservative, Reform can take votes from everyone. I think Restore will mainly take votes from Reform. So that's my sort of gut feeling on all of this.
Ben, you wanted to come back.
Dan, could I just very quickly say something there?
Dan Wootton Outspoken is available as a podcast too. So to listen or watch us on the go, wherever you are, then please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
People just moved on so quickly from stuff.
Please rate and review.
Not good enough, is it, really?
Off the back of the Henry Novak case and everything that's developing on it right now, I want to ask a question, which is... well, two questions really. Is one, why is this happening now specifically with this case? And two, will it spell the end of our current incarnation of anti-racism? And given some of the rhetoric that we've been hearing from the politicians and some of the institutional leaders recently, will they start to pull it back to a more old-fashioned Martin Luther King equal in everybody's meritocratic, colour-blind policing, because the anti-racist approach has proved to be, frankly, just untenable, and policing and managing multicultural Britain as it exists right now, with these huge disparities in outcomes and huge disparities in the way that people are treated by the institutions and the police, and these increasing ethnic divisions, as we saw most explosively in Southport, it's just becoming a little bit too difficult to keep a lid on all of the time. They want to avoid more Southports happening, but the way the system is set up right now is designed to create more Southports.
Yeah.
And is this story being used in a way to
they
kind
did
of
it on purpose,
justify
it sounds
pulling
like,
back on a lot of the excesses? And I'm wondering as well
That
what
was
the
the
reasons
person
for that
that
would be,
meant to
because
go
I
to-
see
to,
a lot of
Taylor Swift
a
concert.
lot of the kind of diversity,
And they
equity,
diverted from
the
that and they did that.
intersectionality, what was called woke for a long time. I see all of that as basically an outgrowth of managerial multiculturalism, where you, in the same way that you have the community service relations
Because they thought
in
by killing 3
America,
kids would be
that
better than killing
department of the
probably
American government that sends people out in the same way
millions
that
of
we have
people in a
Riku
concert.
for, to coach people when there's been a racial incident to try not to inflame community tensions. That's all just sadly what a state would logically do if you've basically thrown a bunch of communities who all hate one another and constantly get into fights into a big pot together and said, get along then. Things are obviously going to explode. So you need these kind of departments and these institutions to stop things from exploding as bad as they could. But after a certain point, it's too difficult, it's too costly, it's too destabilizing. So let's look at the situation, because again, what
So
a lot
they've
of people
abandoned
forget
it.
is how quick the news cycle goes with a lot of these stories. There was the huge outrage last year with something like Axe Girl, the Scottish girl who'd been accosted by migrants and pulled out the knife and the axe, and everybody said that she was going to be the rallying call that everybody would rally around. She was for a little bit, but then got cycled out of the news story. There was Wayne Broadhurst last year, who was murdered by an Afghan migrant who came in 2020. A lot of people can see that as a direct failure of the asylum system, direct failure of the Tory government. Again, a lot of people rallied around him and his name for a little while, but then it got cycled out, and he's just kind of somebody that people bring up every so often to remind you, by the way, multiculturalism causes bad things and it hates you and will try to kill you. So why is it specifically that this story has exploded right now? Because I tell you what, when it first came out and it first happened, it did not have the same kind of staying power. Because I looked into this and traced dates from some of the original reporting from when this happened. Because I've spoken to a lot of people. A lot of people don't even know that this case actually happened last December. A lot of people that I know assume that this must have happened in May because everybody started talking about it in May.
That's
and
what I thought.
The timeline. So here's one of the original articles about the case, which took place on
then
the
we should
3rd of
realise
December 2025.
the
That was
darkness
tragically when
behind
Henry
some-
Novak was
Yeah, well, I should
murdered.
have realised
One of
because
the first
obviously in the
reports on
summer
it
it got
was the 10th
dark.
of December
Even at night
2025.
time,
You see
it's
this
not as
article
dark.
has been updated since
In
then.
summer it's,
But even at that
I was
time,
going to say in the
after
summertime,
initial
even when it's
incident
dark, it's
and
not as
after
dark
the
as in
murder,
winter, is it?
we already had the
So
information.
I probably should have
Victor
realised
Zuma
myself
being
by
the one who
looking
did it,
properly
charged with murder, possession of a bladed
at the
article,
actual
the
video
fact that his
thing, you know,
mother
at the
was also
darkness,
being charged.
that it
We had some of the
did
details, so this
look
was
like
already a
winter.
provocative and emotive case, right? And then
Because I always say look at the weather behind
there's
and then
radio
you'll see what
silence.
time of
The
year
most
or
that you get
where
is like
it
in
is.
April,
I was going to
people
say.
talking about student to be remembered with
Because
celebrity
they made, because that's the
footage.
photo from April.
And Mandani's murder of Southampton student Henry Novak, again on
That
the
looks like a
13th of
summer
April. So there
photo.
was very little said about it in the mainstream news. There were the initial reports and then nothing else said about it.
Yeah.
Until
the
all
court
of a
case.
sudden, this article comes out on the 14th of May this year, which gives all of these details. It talks about the trial that's going on and gives everybody a big update.
Why?
And some would say that the reason that this blew up was primarily thanks to X. You had people like Keith Woods, big fan of a lot of the stuff that he does. Europa's a really interesting and useful resource. But he's saying that basically it would have been barely reported in the media if it wasn't for platforms like X. And there are some there are some cases of people like Chris Donald, Gavin Hopley, both killed for being white, which were barely discussed outside of groups to be considered to be on the extreme right. And this is something I see with a lot of people where they say that basically like these stories only blow up because of X, or these stories are carried along by X and carried along in the mainstream conscious, and people wouldn't talk about them, or the mainstream wouldn't have continued to report on it if it wasn't for X. But I looked into that, and I know that the X search function is a little bit hit and miss, but I did try and look for it. So I tried between the 3rd of December 2025 to the 30th of April 2026 to see what had been reported on it on Twitter, right? And the most that you get is a few people with very, very, very little attention, very little engagement with it, reporting on it, saying this is something that happened.
So to be fair, my first video on this was about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly.
That was when I made one of the first videos I think that was made on YouTube about it. Maybe somebody else did, and I started tweeting about it a lot. But that was 3 weeks ago when I became aware of it.
Even the view count as well. These look like very small accounts.
Yeah. Until, and then I searched between the 1st of May 2026 to the 15th of May 2026, 15th being the day after that initial BBC report that came out on the 14th, and then all of a sudden you start to get all of these slightly bigger accounts start to report on it with these much more highly engaging posts where people start to get attention, 4,500 likes, almost 1 million views each time. So it was only really with that mainstream media report that people started to pay attention to it again. And we can coordinate this as well by seeing how the reaction has been since that initial report came back out, which is, as you showed, the newspaper reports earlier today. This has been something, I was listening to mainstream radio on my drive into work this morning.
Why weren't you listening to Breakfast with Bo?
Because I got here before Breakfast with Bo started.
Okay, that's a good excuse.
I gave Bo a wave before he started.
Right,
you can ask him yourself. I get in very, very early. But you can see all of the newspaper reports, all the newspapers, police face call to drop race bias policies, arrest that outrage the nation, families plea for calm ignored. And on the mainstream radio I was listening to as well, all of these mainstream talking heads were talking about the case, and they were also, every single one of them was bringing up the anti-racial bias of the anti-racist guidelines that the police have to go through, which is something that we've been talking about for ages. It's something that should have been brought up with the approach that the police took to the grooming gangs. Why has the mainstream media never taken such a coordinated attack on police anti-racist standards when it comes to things like the grooming gangs, where the grooming gangs, some of those girls were returned to the people abusing them by the police.
Is it X because, all the journalists are on X?
Well, X tried to push back on things like Wayne Broadhurst, on the Axe Girl, on the grooming gangs.
Yeah.
But the mainstream media, all of these newspapers, everything didn't all coordinate at once around it.
What would be interesting to know is, and I don't know whether you've done this as part of your sort of timeline, Harry, is when Musk first tweeted about this, because I think that Musk's amplification combined with the fact, as I said earlier, that this is everything that they told us George Floyd was.
Oh, yeah.
But with the races swapped, actually true, times 10 as far as I'm concerned.
I'm not saying that people's anger about the situation is inorganic.
What I'm saying is that
you are right.
What I'm saying is that amplification across the pond, it will be likelier given the case's resonance to the George Floyd case. I'm wondering how much that has to do with the
silence still now.
Conviction was
it's been silenced until now.
Didn't come up with anything with Musk, but again, Musk might have commented under one of these saying yes, or
it was about a week ago that Musk got on this person.
Right.
Was it about a week ago?
Yeah.
So again, it seems to have been in the mainstream conscious for longer than Musk has been directly commenting on it. If you are correct there, but again, the question is well, how does this compare to a similar situation where it was just an unambiguous case of racial violence that people were furious about with Southport? How was that reported on at the time? How was that dealt with? Because I remember Southport happening, and I remember there wasn't some big 6-month gap. It was huge immediately. People were out on the street the same night that it happened. People were out on the street for a full week after it happened. And it came across as incredibly organic.
And it caused all sorts with every
immediately
side.
wanted to shut it down, and you ended up with, if you go back to the time that it was happening, what were the reports? What were the headline reports? It wasn't all of this kind of we need to look at racial bias policies, this was the most horrible thing that ever happened, we need to appeal for calm.
You say that they're doing a tactical retreat?
We didn't get any White Lives Matter comments at that time, did we?
Yeah.
What did we have? We had Keir Starmer saying it doesn't matter. We had Keir Starmer coming out and making a public announcement that you're all far-right thugs.
Far-right bandwagon.
Yeah.
Everyone's jumping on a far-right bandwagon.
Yeah, everyone's jumping on the far-right bandwagon. Everybody's jumping. Everybody's following these far-right thugs. You've got to understand, if you're going out and you're taking part in these protests and riot, it doesn't matter why it was that happened, and it all culminated in this. Remember the way there was a coordinated effort to try and encourage people to go out to fake protests in the middle of the week. That everybody went, that's fake. That's not real. Nobody showed up except the anti-racist counter-protests for a photo op at Walthamstow that then on this day, it was the 8th of August in 2024, every single newspaper had this headline.
I remember that day because somebody in the office pointed out, oh look, there's a protest like 5 minutes from my office, and we're all looking at it, it's like, what is this fake nonsense?
Yeah.
But this is clearly the fake.
I think we're all sort of, to varying degrees, relatively well connected in these circles. Like when we were looking at those actual spontaneous protests earlier, you two were talking about, oh, that's John in the audience. Oh, there's young Bob. Oh,
there's young Bob. Yeah.
At the time in 2024, July 2024, we would have known about this if these protests were going to be going down.
Yeah, it was on a load of dodgy Telegram apps, like chats, that all of a sudden they were getting screenshots of this saying, come to this rally and this protest at this time. Don't wear masks or anything, guys. This is totally legit. And everybody went, that's gay op. That is a gay op right there. And then this happened because the media took advantage to try and coordinate this so that either it could be a huge optics fail for anybody who did show up, or they could spin it the way that they did, which was that anti-racism united the nation and pushed all of these far-right provocateurs out of the country.
And therefore have more immigration.
Yes. I think this is a bit of an about-face. They're trying to do a little bit of a heel turn on this whole thing because they know that didn't actually solve the problem. Another Southport is, in multicultural Britain, Southport is just around the corner.
Yes.
At all times. And so this situation comes up and we don't see this coordination going on. What we do see is within a few days of the initial report coming out, you have people like a Lords responding to it. You have articles in places like Unheard talking about anti-racism poisoning British policing. You have the BBC has actually been constantly on this. Like half of the articles on the BBC front page right now are about this, and there's been at least one article every single day. The BBC has not been letting this go. In The Guardian, even, you have these discussions. Yes, the headline says there's a dangerous undercurrent, but you have Shabana Mahmood repeating that phrase, which again, I heard on the radio a lot this morning, to police without fear or favour, which was a very old phrase. In this country, in the policing, going back to at least the 17th century, that I have.
I mean, it meant Catholics then, but
that I have not heard my entire life, frankly, because to police without fear or favour has not been the mission statement of the British police for my entire life.
It was in the 90s, but
I only lived for a little bit in the 90s.
Yes.
All right, and then you have Henry Novak's father saying we want to use, because obviously he must have had Riku prep, saying we want to use Henry's heartbreaking story to make change for the better. We don't want his death to create further division, hatred, or tension. We want his story, but what you don't get is condemnation of people who are angry about it. This is about we need unity, we need change for the better.
If only the Romans had had a nudge unit, then they could have got Boadicea up on stage to say, yes, okay, I know that my daughters are being, raped and I was flogged, but I don't want this to be in any way inflammatory against the Romans, and we need to support their policies to bring in more Romans. I don't want any trouble to come with this.
Who knows how history could have turned out. And then at the end you get the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire is now leading calls for a review of religious exemptions on the carryings of knives after the murder. So this religious carve-out that's been given to Sikhs, all of a sudden it's looking pretty likely that's going to be taken away from them, because it's a clear case of two-tiered unfairness baked into the system that's incredibly visible and has clearly caused harm in this situation, right? Starmer, instead of saying this is disgusting that people are angry about this, has come out and said that as a father, I've watched the full video and it made me feel sick to see what happened to that boy. So he's been a lot more tactical about it. He's been a lot more level-headed about it, and he's not tried to stoke people.
Well, he didn't come out and say it doesn't matter, which is what he said in response to those girls being murdered. He came out and said it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and asked if he agreed with Kemi Badenoch that there should be a Macpherson-style inquiry into whether the anti-racist culture in the police should goes too far. Starmer said that he was not ruling it out. So Starmer himself is not ruling out basically repealing a lot of the Macpherson stuff. Because when they say Macpherson-style inquiry, Macpherson was the turning point for the police to turn them into this in the first place.
I'll make a quick point here, if I may.
Yeah.
I think that one of the neglected features of the whole history of post-war Britain, in a way, has been the congenital failure of the centre-right to put up a good fight on these sorts of questions. And given that, and I would argue, in large part thanks to the efforts of Restore Britain in dragging much of the centre-right kicking and screaming to a more sort of patriotic, level-headed, less psychotic place. The fact that you now do, if you read the Telegraph today compared to what the Telegraph would have been like 10 years ago, the Overton window has been moving rightwards at a rapid pace, partly due to hastened by events, but also I think partly hastened by the pressure that we've been putting on the kind of centre-right, small c conservative establishment. Sooner or later, given that it takes two sides of the political aisle to tango, that is bound to be reflected in terms of the rhetoric of people like Shabana Mahmood and Keir Starmer as well. So a lot of it may have to do with how quickly the Overton window has been shifting over the last 2 years, and the fact that some on the right appear to be recovering courage that was completely absent 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is to do with there is going to be internal and external pressure on our government and our state apparatus right now, which is making it more and more costly for them to carry on with these policies. And two, just the effects of the policies themselves are just not worth it.
Yep.
It's just not worth it for the sake of having... Because Deepwall was a Deliveroo driver. That's what he was doing the night that this happened. He'd finished his Deliveroo and was going out to get some curried chips or something. For the sake of having a couple of extra Deliveroo drivers who probably aren't even actually paying any tax because they're probably signed up to somebody else's account in the first place, it's not worth it for all of this to constantly be happening. So this is kind of being manoeuvred and allowed to be manoeuvred in a way where they can say, as we're seeing right now, further down in here, basically the police anti-racism commitment, which is being reviewed by police chiefs. A national unit of senior police chiefs says it will review anti-racism guidance that's been at the centre of criticism over the actions of the officers. The National Police Chiefs Council has announced it will look into policing's anti-racism commitment document, with NPCC Chairman Gavin Stevens saying it is listening to legitimate concerns about how some of these commitments are worded or phrased. And I heard a lot of that on the radio this morning as well. People saying that the people calling in were saying like, people of colour, they've always been oppressed by the police, Macpherson, Stephen Lawrence. It was actually the talking heads saying, but how can you justify the way the police acted here? How can you justify the wording of these particular statements? So it was the regime talking heads were the ones actually pushing back against shitlibs calling in and saying, well, this is just what we've got to live with in multicultural Britain. So a trigger has been pulled here where these people are now allowed to point out the obvious, that, hey, these resulted in the ridiculous conduct of police officers who immediately listened to a bunch of Sikhs who said, oh, we've been racially abused, and handcuffed a dying man who'd been stabbed.
Do you think they realised now that their position is untenable, so it's a tactical retreat?
Completely. As well as that, at the same time you have in Europe, which Starmer is almost explicitly trying to get better connections and ties to in Europe. Yes, you have the big things with signing them up for mass migration with India through these trade deals and such, but at the same time, you have a more hard line of anti-immigration coming into the European Parliament as well, who have put through a lot of changes to make it easier to deport people. So you do have, they want to realign with Europe, but at the same time, Europe is becoming slightly more hardline on certain types of migration and illegal migration as well. So it might be a lot of different conversion factors going on here. And then again, you mentioned the Telegraph. Telegraph's been going pretty hard on this. Did anti-racism condemn Henry Novak to die? Yes. Henry Novak and the Spectator and the Evil of Anti-Racism. That was in May. And then we have another article this morning. Did Henry Novak and the Problem with Anti-Racism. It's quite impressive that they released the same article twice. But they want to hammer the point home, I suppose. Zia Yusuf goes on to Channel 4 and just says anti-white racism is structurally embedded in police. So we have Nigel Farage and Zia Yusuf both mainstreaming White Lives Matter and anti-white racism in a way that they have never had it so publicly before. I think they found their spines all of a sudden.
I think this is partly my point. The fact that, I mean, goodness knows it's taken a long time, but arguably ever since Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech in April 1968, there just has been a kind of congenital cowardice on the sort of establishment centre-right of British politics, and so rather than taking the fight to the left, taking the fight to the enemy, as it were, like the right's whole sort of modus operandi since the 60s has been to make its peace with the kind of left-wing cultural revolution and try to play politics very obediently within that progressive framework. And not 5 years ago, you can find people like Kemi Badenoch trumpeting the virtues of diversity, trumpeting the virtues of multiculturalism and all the rest of it. This is just being form on the sort of establishment right. But because, as I say, events combined with the explosion of genuine independent voices on social media, obviously Rupert Lowe is a huge figure in this, and then from July 2025 onwards, Restore Britain, a big sort of institutional vehicle for this kind of discontent. It just is this can no longer be ignored, and all of a sudden you have people writing for these magazines like The Spectator, like The Telegraph, who are willing to go to places that they wouldn't have been 10 years ago. And once the party, in the form of Reform, that is highest in the polls is talking in this way, it is impossible for mainstream centre-left or indeed centrist outlets like The Times to ignore it.
Yes.
So it just kind of creates a cascade throughout the whole media ecosystem.
So if you want to contain all of that, ultimately, if you want to contain it, you can't keep just doing the same thing that you've been doing the whole time, because that has not worked. So to contain it, you kind of have to, in a certain way, give them what they want. Okay, we'll ban these little knives and give you a concession there. Okay, we'll pull back on all of the anti-racism policing and give you a concession there and make it actually so it's a bit more even and equal, potentially.
That's pretty big, though.
Yeah, that is pretty big.
Because I mean,
I'm not saying containment. Yeah. I'm not saying containment is always bad in the short term, because AA has said before, good containment is basically they give you what you want.
Yes, and look, I mean, I'm not sort of ascribing any sort of good faith motives to people like Shabbat Mahmoud, Keir Starmer, but the fact that they are willing to. Like, you could argue that the whole sort of Macpherson report ranks alongside Windrush as one of the major sort of post-war symbolic myths that sort of are supposed to define Britain. And the fact that they are willing to revise the recommendations and conclusions and the kind of slew of PowerPoints and training days that grew out of that, which it sounds like they are willing to do.
Yeah,
that's a pretty monumental.
And what a lot of people don't talk about the Macpherson report as, and I think Peter Hitchens is one of the few to actually do this. Is talk about it as part of the larger package of New Labour's revolution, because a lot of people don't realise the Macpherson report was 5 or 6 years after the actual death of Stephen Lawrence.
It was 1999, and the death was in 93.
Yeah, so people had been,
but it was in 93.
Yeah, people had been sat on that for a long time. That was a situation where that was just in the background for a long time, and Blair's government decided to pick that up. Oh, we want to reform the way that policing is done. We've introduced a load of immigrants into the country, so we need to make our police more anti-racist so that they don't constantly get angry about the fact that we arrest them more because they stab each other.
It was basically a subtle redefinition of law enforcement, impartial law enforcement without fear or favour, as sort of race-conscious social work. That is basically what.
But I'll go further than that. What they did is they turned the police into the paramilitary wing of the Guardian newspaper.
Well, that's
essentially.
Like it.
But at the same time as you get this, on the 13th of April, obviously you and Rupert, you guys have all had the independent grooming gang inquiry, which was a great success. But the government's conducting its own grooming gang inquiry at the moment off of the back of the Casey report from last year. At the same time in April, we had this big BBC News report talking about all of the different ways in which the asylum system is completely broken and needs reform. And then just last month, we had the reports of net migration dropping to its lowest figures since 2012.
It has not.
Which also all coincides, I've just realised off the top of my head there, with Tony Blair releasing a very strongly worded letter to the Keir Starmer government about how they're screwing everything up and need to reform everything to make sure that the country doesn't just tank and go into perpetual decline.
I did read that essay though, and there was actually very little mention of the issue of migration in that essay. He mainly focuses on tech and the balance of and the shifting balance of power geopolitically, but there are one or two references to it. But he Tony Blair is very much a boil the frog, a little more slowly type of creature.
He certainly is. So what it seems like to me is that this story is being used, not that it's an inorganic story, not that people aren't right to be angry about it. It's a horrible story, it's incredibly emotive, and a genuine injustice was done, but it is being amplified right now as part of a larger package, from what I see, of the UK government kind of reorientating itself so that it can cut off all of the fat and stop destroying the country quite as quickly as it has been doing. Because like you say, the frog just needs a little bit more time to boil, or else we're going to get 10, 20, 30 more Southports in increasingly quick succession, and we don't want that.
Gradual euthanasia instead of abrupt murder.
Basically, yes.
Yeah,
So that's my theory on this. Let me know what you think in the comments.
Poppy's back, ladies and gentlemen. Where have you been?
I've been in China.
How was it, mate?
It was fantastic. It was really, really interesting. I spent 3 weeks there, but I never ever want to look at a plate of noodles again.
Oh, really?
I'm full. I've had enough for a lifetime.
Did you miss me?
Of course I missed you.
There wasn't sincerity in that. I didn't feel like it was sincere.
You asked me if I missed being at work. Yeah, come on. I've got to be realistic.
Ridiculous, China. I tell you, I had a week off camping do you know the heat wave we had here?
I do. I'm very worried I missed it.
I ended up in a tent. It was 41 degrees. It was like living in Satan's. Anyway, let's get on the show. Can I just say, there is still only one story in town. It's very tinny this morning. Are you listening here? It's very weird. There is still only one story in town, but so many different aspects. Can I just say nice and early this morning, if you do want to be part of the show, 0344 499 1000. Tommy is here. It's the only number you need. We have a text system you can get involved in as well, 87222. It's a sad day for Poppy and I and the team because Christian is going on holiday. So God knows what's going to happen next week. The new work experience girl, Harriet, will probably end up producing. But I'm told that Christian isn't going in a tent. So there, because he's under the thumb, he's probably going looking around museums. I'm joking. 0344 499 1000. Let's just take this story of, the horrendous story of Henry Novak, the 18-year-old university student who was fatally stabbed in December after confronting a Sikh man who was harassing female students. His attacker, Vikram Diggle, we've seen the footage. Jailed on Monday for, I think, a measly 21 years, having lied to the police about being racially abused, and the Hampshire Police Force, quite rightly, under huge pressure because the footage showing their officers going, Henry's going, I can't breathe, and they're going, mate, you're not stabbed, just get on with it. And the last thing this poor kid saw in his life was being handcuffed, and not his last rights being administered, but his rights. Well, this scumbag stood there. He has eventually been arrested. Now, politically, what's happened is that everybody has had their say. And one of the most vocal was Nigel Farage, who on, I think, even Tuesday morning, addressed the nation from where he was in the United Kingdom and was very forcibly saying we have two-tier policing. Proof of it, it's not acceptable. He was, let's say, roundly slaughtered yesterday in the House of Commons. He warned that rioting after the murder of Henry Novak risks the beginning of wider unrest. The Reform leader said the division will get worse if young white men feel that police are prejudiced against him. In a heated exchange with Starmer, Nigel said the British people were living under two-tier policing, to which Starmer responded by saying, no, they're not, and that you are exploiting this tragedy to create grievance and division. In fact, almost every politician in the House of Commons seems to agree with Starmer. I want to know what you think. Was Farage speaking the truth or creating division? Is not the job of our politicians to not always listen to focus groups, but say what they feel? That's just my opinion. I'm sure Farage says things that are wrong. Do we have two-tier policing? And do you think that Farage was being divisive, or was he actually speaking about the reality of what's going on? Pops, what's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty self-evident what's happened in the Henry Novak case. If the examples were reversed, if it was another man who was saying, I can't breathe, as we can remember from a couple of years ago, the entire world would have to change. You know, you would see politicians taking the knee, you would see the police promising that they're going to change, they put out new training guidance, you'd see companies putting out statements, and none of that has happened.
Yeah.
Instead, what you've seen is the Prime Minister try and hide behind Henry Novak's family.
That's what I said yesterday, mate. That's
Which
what I
is
said.
Absolutely disgusting.
He wouldn't. This went viral yesterday. And this is, by the way, I'm on a voice piece for Nigel Farage, but as a voter, I thought, you know what, Farage, you put your finger on the pulse there. And I watched him yesterday, and he was being berated by